Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. I'm so glad you're here. You know, I try to do different things on the show, but it always comes down to bringing you this message. Amazing guest, awesome information, tips and ideas that we can all benefit from, and having people on here that have an amazing amount of passion with what they do because they want everybody around them to be as healthy as possible. And we know it's a crazy world. Mental health is not in a good place. And there's also a lot of confusion. You know, when I first started in the industry, there was only a couple choices of everything. And now there's so many choices. I thought about this the other day. I was traveling and I was in the potato chip aisle at a health food store. It wasn't a section. It wasn't a shelf. It was an aisle. There were like 18,000 different kinds of chips. And I'm not a real big chip person, but I thought to myself, how are people deciding what they pick? And I thought to myself, the easiest way for people to make, the best decisions is to educate and to give them the information. Well, today I have a longtime friend with me. Kelly Clonts is here, and we are going to be talking about just a little bit about everything. We haven't connected in a while, but we go way back. We've done radio shows on my old radio show. Kelly is an educator with Europharma-Terry Naturally, their wonderful line of products. And we're going to talk a little bit about everything today. So sit back and enjoy. You're going to love what she has to say. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm great.
You know, I'm great. And this is kind of fun. It's a different kind of platform for me. I think what I've learned that I really love the most with this is that I get the chance to see the person I'm talking with.
That's right.
And we get that interaction together. So, hey, what's new in your world?
Well, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've lived here for a while, but my mother moved in with us since you and I saw each other last. So I do some caregiving, and my husband is a huge support. So it's been amazing having him by my side and helping me through this journey. And still traveling around, visiting health food stores everywhere. So, that's not necessarily new, but what we learn and what we get to talk about, and who we get to meet, and the amazing stories that people share with us. That's always very inspiring and insightful. And so, just rolling, just, enjoying life.
I think it's so fun. People say to me all the time, they're like, aren't you done yet? And I'm like, no, I have no plans on stopping what I'm doing because as I show up and whether I'm doing a training with one or two people or if I'm doing a big consumer lecture, if I'm doing an auditorium with 10,000 people, I mean, you get the same amount of excitement. You know that today people are guided with good information and education. And a lot of people are in need of information, but there's so much confusion, even within our own industry. Sometimes we're stepping all over each other and we're not making the path easy for people to choose.
Yeah, and I think there's so much on the internet that confuses the story. So, a bit of information from one website or from one advertisement, and then you go into the health food store and you see a huge selection. So how do you narrow it down? So it really requires some savvy employees and retailers and helpful practitioners to guide us to where we can get the best products that are available. Because fortunately, coming through this industry in the last 30 years, we've discovered that there's so many amazing herbal medicines, for example, used around the world that we now have access to that are tremendous remedies. They broaden our toolkit of what we can do for ourselves, our family, our community. And navigating between which one is going to be effective or which one is true to form or which one's the most bioavailable where my body can use it. I mean, that's a lot to navigate through. So I'm really glad that there's been an education outlet for people interested in natural health. I started in the medical side, and I remember when I started working at a hospital, we had to do a lot of trainings. They would call it an in-service, and we'd have to go through a whole series before we could even have interaction or contact with a patient, right? So, in our industry, we fortunately have had wonderful platforms. You've created a wonderful platform through the
Thank
years
you.
for education. And that way we can help somebody learn the meaning of what a vitamin is, because sometimes their doctor doesn't even know the meaning of what a vitamin is. And then we can build from there, what is, homeopathy, and what important amino acids should we have in our diet, or protein, or, are we vegetarian or not? There's just so many directions. So it's a learning curve that continues for a lifetime, really.
And a good point. Many good points. Thank you. I think what I've seen in our industry is I've seen a little bit of failing on our side in the education department. I don't know whether this is because companies have bought out other companies, and we've had people that have come in that are from another industry that have swooped in and picked up stores. I digress. But I think what has happened is a lot of these companies have, for some reason, stopped their education focus. And I think it's been very disheartening to the consumer. And I think one of the main things is when you're sitting on a shelf as a company, if the people within that store realm do not know what you are about, your formulation, your blending, your delivery system, why that product was put together, what is your dream behind your line? If people don't understand it, number one, how could they be an ambassador? Number two, how can they talk about something that they've never been trained on? And it's never been more visible than, I have a quick story to share with you, and I've shared this before. I was in a small town in Oklahoma, and I stopped in this tiny little store, and it was really cute. And in the store, she had this slat board, excuse me, on the back of the wall and back of her counter. And there were shelves with products there. And so there she was talking with a customer, and the customer left, and we chatted. Another lady came in, and she said, "Can you show me an omega-3 fish oil?" And she said, "I'd love to." So she turned around, and there were like 7 brands there, all of which I know because I've done shows with all of them. So I was just kind of listening, putzing around, listening to her explain the difference. And her hand went like this, and she went from one side, and then she went back again, and she went here, and then she grabbed a bottle of Nordic Ultimate Omega, which is what I use. And so she handed it to her, she told the lady, and the lady paid for it, how to use it, and the lady left. And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And know that I know all those lines. I love them all. And I said, "Why did you pick that?" And she goes, "Well, out of all those brands, they're the only one that ever came and gave us a training."
Oh.
And I thought to myself, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. That is exactly what it's all about. Because when we leave a store, when you and I do what we do, or we leave an audience, or we leave a consumer educational lecture, or we finish a Zoom training, or whatever it is that we're doing, we not only want people to have more information than they had when we started, but we wanted to be able to present what we're giving them and have it stay with them so they can make better, wiser choices, whether it's for themselves or whether it's for the people that they're helping. And that's kind of what we're doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the key point, I think, many times is to find out what's the main concern someone has. Usually if I hear 5 or 6 things and maybe blood pressure is at the top of their list, then we're going to start there. How can we support your healthy cardiovascular system? And then they're amazed at simple things like good quality olive oil. Stop using the regular vegetable oil you're buying at the grocery store and upgrade.
Well,
Fiber.
to your point, Kelly, I think people think sometimes it has to be difficult or it doesn't work. And sometimes when you give them a little bit of a quick change or a tip or a little bit of a looking at the path a little bit differently, sometimes you'll see that look and they're like, "Really?" It's that it can be that easy. Well, it can be. It can also be more difficult, but it could also be a positive change for other areas of your health and well-being. So it's just a perpetual process. And the other thing is for people, if you're a consumer, the thing to remember is you do not have to make every change today. Sometimes a little bit at a time, bite off a little piece because it's not overwhelming.
Good point. Yeah. And to your previous point, that was exactly me. So I had a doctor's appointment with just bad news, no good directive, no solution. We'll wait and see. So I was working at a hospital, and the nurse I was working with, here's my story. It's a vascular condition in my eyes. I later learned it was a side effect of a medication I had been on.
I remember
And
this.
she said, you should look into grapeseed extract. And I had never heard of this. I had no supplements or experience with herbal medicine, like no awareness of even a good multivitamin, right? And so it started with just one antioxidant. And she told me how to take it correctly, to give it time, which are two valuable pieces of information. So I did that. And the first month I was using this antioxidant, my brain worked better. Like I noticed right away, I could concentrate better. I was a full-time student in college, so I could tell while I was working full-time at a nursing station at a hospital, that my brain was working better. And so the next 2 months, allergy season rolls through. Now, my whole life, I had been an allergy sufferer. Every time the trees would get high in pollen, whatever, and skin sensitivities, like I couldn't garden without protecting my skin, or I would have a dermatitis reaction. Dust allergies, pet allergies. So, I'm about 90 days into this, and I'm like, why don't I have any symptoms? This is interesting. So it was curiosity now. Like, now I want to take in more information about this, because this is the only thing I've changed. And so at the university, we could order research before the internet was so handy. And you would wait a couple weeks and get information from the other side of the world. And lo and behold, these things were, results that they had been using clinically in Finland and other parts of Europe. And so I was hooked. I was like, okay, I'm going to skip what I'm learning over here in the hospital side and come back to Mother Nature. And that's where I want my school to be. That's where I want to learn more.
It's we all have these amazing journeys. And, I started very young with Dr. Earl Mindell in Los Angeles. He was my first mentor, and I was just a kid. And all of a sudden, he kind of just threw me in. It was sink or swim, and I decided to swim. And he was the one that actually handed me my first microphone, and I just never gave it back. And that was almost 45 years ago. So after tens of thousands of radio shows, and now the podcast, it's just been a passion. And of course, we've seen so many amazing changes, things that were not even a glimmer in our eye. Someone asked me the other day, they said, what was one of the biggest things, changes that you saw over the years? And I said that you could use a probiotic that didn't need to be refrigerated. That was huge. That was huge to me, that I could buy a shelf-stable probiotic. I remember traveling. It would be the last thing I packed, and I'd put it in a Ziploc with like a freezer pack or something. I'd get to where I am. I'd rip open my suitcase and put it in a refrigerator or put it in a thing of ice, and it'd be the last thing that I packed to go home. And when I got home, I'd rip it out of my suitcase and put it back in the refrigerator, and I didn't have to do that anymore. I thought that was huge.
Exactly.
And the zeros now, billions. I remember being in the health food store. The first time I saw a probiotic and it said million on it, I'm like, million? That's a thing? There's a million of something that you can actually measure? And all of a sudden now it's in hundreds of billions. And I'm thinking to myself, probiotics has been a fun category to see change.
Oh, yeah. The Human Genome Project really opened it wide open for us to learn so much. Things I didn't learn in biology or anatomy and physiology classes when I was in college. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
It's fun to see the changes, but I guess we have to weigh the changes against the needs that are now an issue that weren't an issue before. There was a time when we had a very small amount of health conditions, or maybe we had them, but we didn't admit them or accept them or title them or name them. And now today, of course, everything's got a name. And but the world is a different place. I mean, we're even a different place now after the few years after the pandemic. We're in a completely different place where a lot of people came out of hiding and, brought their health conditions with them because they don't feel isolated or shamed, or maybe they found out that they weren't the only one dealing with some of these things. So to think that and I get cocky every once in a while and think to myself, okay, I know it all. I don't. I'm not even close, because in the middle of that process, something changed and I had to learn it again. So there's always something to learn. And maybe that's why we've been so motivated to stay with it, because we want to make sure we know what's going on.
It's a lot to keep up with. A friend of mine that I've respected for many years as a clinical herbalist, and she also went through aromatherapy school with me, and so we became trained in clinical aromatic medicine. She is a very talented and knowledgeable classic homeopathic practitioner, and so she wanted me to come on board, and I said, I don't have the capacity to take because that's a whole nother huge school of learning, right? Yeah. So just keeping up with what we have on our plate, from vitamins and minerals, and how much we're learning about the body and mechanisms. The introduction of the endocannabinoid system came along since we've been in the industry. So,
oh boy,
like, that was huge. Yeah.
That was like coming in like a wrecking ball. I tell you, that was, I remember being at Expo and we were doing a lecture on a stage there, and this room capacity was like 400 or 500 people, and there were like 4,000 people in this room, and everybody's like, what is this? What does it do? Who can take it? Who can't do it? It was just like, whew, it was just like overtook everything. And maybe that's the exciting part of this industry, and to a point you made earlier, the internet. I think the internet for some people have become a double-edged sword, because I think that it's a great place to get information, but you should probably take that information and find the science that goes along with it after. But also, we've also seen a lot of information maybe coming from people that probably shouldn't be dispelling that information. And I think sometimes, the parameters of DSHEA sometimes get trampled on, and information is shared that, yeah, I know we'd love to share. There's many times I'd like to say a lot more than I get to say, but I respect DSHEA, and I respect the ambassadors of, the legal side of our industry as well. And I respect what they have to do, because that's a tough job. Because it's very easy to be in the middle of a conversation and say something that you should not be able to say. It just kind of slides out during conversation. So, but I mean, as far as the industry is concerned, I think people are really adapting to the idea of being able to make change. And some of us long timers in the industry, we've seen a lot of changes, but I think we're still excited about it.
Certainly, and the research that just keeps coming down the pike. I think that's one of the big misnomers to the public, is that we're not validated or legitimate or safe or regulated or clean, and is actually with the brands that are good quality. All those things, those boxes are checked. And the research that continues to happen around the world on botanicals, and a lot of drug companies still start there to get ideas, right, about what they're going to try to develop by looking at what Mother Nature's already providing for us. So I really enjoy the fact that we have databases of literature, like the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, provides the herbal monographs for us. And then we can also resource the ones from around the world, like the legendary German Commission E monographs. And so we have a lot of resources now. I think that's a wonderful thing about the internet, to access something through PubMed.org or the National Institute for Health. They've been just collecting so much great information for us to learn. Like, we might have an idea for a plant or a botanical that's pretty narrow. I think andrographis is a great example. Like, we just thought this plant really is like this antiviral we're going to use during seasonal support needs, and we've learned so much more about it. And I think in the world of aromatic medicine, a lot of people know a few essential oils. They'll know lavender or tea tree. And I was in a store doing a training just yesterday, and I start mentioning a few others like myrtle. And he's been learning about aromatherapy, but he's never heard of myrtle. And so I get very excited to talk about this essential oil, and how many varieties there are around the world, and how it's used to support especially the respiratory system. And so I'm very passionate about learning. Once I found I thought originally it was psychology, like I was going to grow up to be a psychologist, and I was working in that field. Once I was introduced to plants, and it was literally a friend. I was already using grapeseed extract. I was ordering it directly from France, and really happy about it. And my friend comes over, and she's well versed in herbal medicine. She starts pointing at all the plants in my backyard. I'm thinking it's part of the lawn, like weeds or grass. And she's naming like chickweed, plantain. She keeps going. And I'm like, you mean there's a use for this stuff?
All I know is I mow it.
Right. Like I'll see the birds pick the seeds out of it, maybe. Like, obviously it's edible, but I don't know what to do with it. So now that's the first thing I like to go to. I'd rather use something that has a much bigger window of safety. And there are certain plants, obviously, like hemlock, I'm not going to go out and use. But for the most part, a lot of what naturally grows in my backyard is very safe. So I travel to herbal conferences, medical herbal conferences, medical aromatic conferences, and practitioners come in from all over the world to teach. And what really gets me excited is seeing the pharmacists and the doctors and the nurses in the audience. So if you're a practitioner, which I've experienced this with loved ones being a medical advocate, is closed-minded to vitamins, like one of my mother's doctors that I met early on in assisting her didn't even agree with fundamental vitamins, like even supplementing with vitamin D or B vitamins. And here she was, a stroke survivor. Like, there's certain nutrients that are super helpful in that recovery. So when we walked out of that appointment, I looked at my mom. I said, we're going to find a better doctor. And we had to go like 2 stops before we found the guy that was like, listen, I want your mom on the B vitamins, the coenzyme Q10, extra D3. He named off a few other things like omega-3 fatty acids. And so I was like, okay, we're in the same camp. This is good. We can communicate. We can hope to achieve the same goal, which is I would like for my mother to come off of all these medicines. I don't want her to live on all these medications the rest of her life. She didn't want to live on all these medications the rest of her life. So I needed the professional, and sometimes the pharmacist is super helpful in navigating the waters with that. And so we were able to do that. So she's on a fourth of the medications that she was on 5 years ago. And this has been with the assistance of the medical community, her practitioners. But it took navigating, just like we have to in the internet world. I get sometimes riled up when I'll see something posted about the use of a plant or an essential oil or a supplement, and it's really out of context of how that's safely used. And so I get concerned. Or it might go, the pendulum might be way on the other side, and it's really too cautious of a statement for how safe this particular option really is. So today, I actually, by the way, just got horrible news about a friend of ours, but they had moved away a few years ago, so I'd lost contact with her. But I didn't realize that she had become dependent on pain medicine. And we found out today that she took her own life. And to hear that is another, example of what I've heard before from people in our community, even loved ones, that think the only route is the big guns of the pharmaceutical world, when really you can complement that tremendously with the natural route and find a practitioner that helps you navigate through that. And I think you're one of the most brilliant with your expertise in naturopathic medicine, to be able to be a resource to say, hey, here's somebody that might be a really good touching stone to help you navigate through these waters safely. So, I really wish I had known what was going on, because I would have certainly interjected some ideas that might have prevented, the backlash of the rebound effect of pain medicine, right? Or the mood disorders that can come tied
Yeah,
into the microbiome conversation for sure.
it's more common than we want to know, and and I think that it's changed dramatically. I in my mind I go back to like 1979, 1980. I remember I was working in a small health food store. It was Great Earth Vitamins. I was working at a store in Westwood near UCLA, and I was young. I'm 20 maybe, and we were there doing inventory, and there was a knock at the back door, and I looked at the manager and I said, "Aren't you closed?" And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "It's just the doctors," and I'm like, the doctors. I'm wrapping my head around this. So she opened up the back door, and there were like these three doctors there, and she had these three bags ready and gave them their bags, and they left. And I'm like, all right, what was that all about? Looked like a drug deal. And she just said, well, they do not want to come in the front of the store because they don't want their colleagues to see them in a health food store. So they order their stuff, and then they come after hours to pick it up at the back door. And I'm like, wow. And that was like the first time that I had seen anything like that. And it was funny because now I will go and do lectures with a whole room full of doctors. And I'll go to a hospital and you'll sit down, there'll be 150 urologists there, or gastroenterologist or oncologist. And they're asking questions. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, 45 years later, now they want to talk. So there has been kind of a friendly kind of camaraderie that has come up, and we found out that we can both exist within the same room simultaneously and maybe harmoniously and synergistically.
And learn from one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? So, big question here. What do you think is happening in our industry right now, present time? We know where we've come from, like present day today. Where do you think we are?
Well, it's a growing industry. It's getting bigger and bigger day by day. A lot of big companies that exist. I'm in Atlanta, so one great example is Coca-Cola is a big company. They are all interested in what's happening with even something like a functional drink, right? If you go to a trade show, I think there's probably more functional drinks to learn about and to find than almost any category of growth. And one of the problems we have with the development and the exposure is that the herbal content or the vitamin and nutritional content sometimes is really minuscule to what we need to see an effect or a result, right? And so I think one of the things you touched on earlier that's so important is that learning curve from what's being advertised or what's popular on the internet or through our friends to where is it really a useful frequency, dosing, style of how to administer something that allows there to be a much bigger benefit than we thought. So while we've got a lot of growth in our industry, to your point, there's a need for the education to catch up because there's so many options. You'll see gummies, you'll see powders, you'll see tinctures or liquid administration, you'll see delivery enhancement options within those things, let alone capsules, soft gels, suppositories. That hasn't really become popular here yet.
That's fine.
Syrup, and so if I'm experiencing something that needs a lot of attention, I need to know, like, of these different delivery methods, what is going to be the most applicable to what I'm dealing with. And I love talking to the people that work in the aisles at the health food stores
Me
because
too.
I will ask them that exact same question, like, what are you really seeing lately that's happening and what's popular? And some things are old school, like magnesium, like That's been on our shelves forever, and it's a superstar right now.
Yeah. What's funny is we were talking about vitamin D the other day. I was in Arizona, and we were talking about you and I are on the road all the time, and we were talking about vitamin D, and they said, well, vitamin D's been around a long time. I said, yes, but also no. I said, when I started, vitamin D was on the bottom shelf, and you weren't allowed to talk about it, because if somebody was taking a multiple vitamin, you could not talk to them about extra D, because back then it was considered toxic. And I said, now we're testing for it in our blood work. We're finding out that so many of us are deficient. And vitamin D has become an all-star right next to things like omega-3s and black seed oil and some of the basics that are out there now, of course, probiotics. I said, but isn't it interesting that for the longest time, here was this shining star, dulled up and sitting on the bottom shelf with no focus. And now today it's eye level and there's 3 shelves full.
That's
So
true.
it's really interesting. We've seen so many amazing changes. If you were asked this question, where do you see us going moving forward? We know where we are. We kind of know what's trickling in. Where do you think the industry is going? Do you think it's going to continue to grow? Do you think it's going to become more and more of a necessity because of the way we live our lives?
Absolutely, yeah. And I believe more is going to happen at the medical education side and medical practice. I live right next to Emory.
Okay.
And there's a researcher that her whole department is about medicinal plants.
Wow.
And so she's a medicine hunter in the world of plant medicine. But if you go into the emergency room or you end up being admitted for a procedure, there's a huge gap. There's a huge disjunct between these two departments. So I think that's going to continue to meld and come together. And I hope so, because I think we're missing out on a lot of potential. I think always there's this challenge of how to make a transition that doesn't cost the industry too much, right? And so when I hear even about new equipment in the health industry, there's this pause and hesitation to switch to all the new stuff, right? Because of how can the hospital or the doctor's office afford that? And until I believe, the Health Freedom Act has been something we've been involved in for so long, for freedom of health. And so until the practitioners feel confident that what they have to offer that's gentle and safe, I really have a good story actually to illustrate this. So, we've all been through the world of COVID and the lockdown and the change to our whole world around this. So, about 2 years into this, my neighbor actually was sick with a mild case of the coronavirus. And I run into him in the backyard because we have a big adjoining backyard and we love to do yard work and garden and things. And I'm like, where have you been? He's like, well, I just haven't felt right since I was sick. And I remembered when that was. And my first reaction was, well, there's an herb for that. And he poo-pooed my suggestion, like, I'm going to go to another doctor and get another opinion. So 3 doctors later, months of, fatigue and distress, he texted me as he's leaving the last doctor's appointment regarding this and said, guess what? And this was at Emory. The doctor recommended curcumin. And I said, excellent. So I knew exactly, where to direct him. And at the same time, I knew his energy was a big part of the problem. So I immediately thought of an adaptogen herb to incorporate with that. And when I got to visit with him again, I said, there's also really important cardiovascular antioxidants that probably get to the nitty gritty alongside your doctor's recommendation. So I believe he incorporated, in addition, coenzyme Q10 and the grapeseed extract, more B vitamins. So, you're trying to recharge and re-nourish and reset how that injury from a illness, from an exposure to a pathogen that took a huge toll on the cardiovascular system and was robbing him of cellular energy, all those doctors and months in between, it wasn't being addressed.
You just made a really good point. When COVID was here, the whole thing was taking a test to find out if you were positive for COVID or coronavirus. And then the next best thing was continuing to take tests until it says you were negative. And then at that point, people just closed the door and shut it down. The problem is there were so many people left with the ramifications of that problem. Months and months later, they're still feeling the fatigue and the headaches and the coughing and the sneezing and the exhaustion and all that stuff. But that door was closed. And most of the focus was on all the new cases coming in. I get it. I understand it. It was a pandemic, and a lot of us, we didn't know what to do. We were guessing. And I think a lot of people, even today, who never really did any rebuilding and, resourcing of energy and nutrients are still experiencing some of the ramifications of that virus. And then there's people that they tested positive, had a few sneezes and coughs, and walked away with nothing. So I think it depended on where you were at that time. And what's really funny is I was in Washington, D.C. and Seattle. And I was doing this big, gigantic dinner training. They had closed a whole restaurant. I had hundreds of people there. And we got done with the lecture. We walked outside on the street, and they were boarding up the windows of the stores. And I looked at everybody, and I'm like, what's going on? Because we didn't know. We were inside. All of a sudden, this limousine pulls up, and it says, Mr. Burke, Mr. Willits. They picked us up. They were a broker I was traveling with. He said, we're going to the airport. We already packed up your rooms. And I'm like, what? So they put us in the car. They're telling us nothing. We get to the airport. There's no one there. They throw us on a plane. I got like 8 people on the plane, and nobody's saying anything. I get home. I get off the plane. I'm coming through the airport. A buddy of mine picks me up, and I'm like, what is going on? He goes, the world is shutting down. And I'm like, shut up. And he goes, the world is shutting. And I've said, what are you talking about? And like 2 days later, the world shut down. And I'm just like, this is like this out of a scene of a movie. It was so hard to wrap our mind around it. And then all we wanted to do was wrap our mind around it because it was everything. It was directional signs on the floor, and then the masks and the inoculations and the fast vaccines. And it was a whirlwind. I'm telling you, a whirlwind. And of course, I couldn't stay home. I was going nuts. I was talking to the dogs and the horses and having full conversations. And I remember calling the company. I'm like, y'all need to get me on the road. I said, this is not working for me. I said, I know more about my animals than they're telling me, and I'm getting it. Get me on the road. So I was traveling during it, and there was nobody else out there, but I was. And it was amazing how the entire world just folded our hand and kind of gave in. It's not a time that I would like to revisit.
And I was doing the same thing. I was working in Salt Lake City. So the NBA game was happening across the street from my hotel when it all started to unfold. And the next thing I knew, they had canceled all of my trips coming up that were on the West Coast. And in addition to that, all of my appointments, like my dinner trainings and consumer seminars, were canceled just in an instant. But they didn't pack up my bag and send me right to the airport. We decided to go visit the local health food stores. And it was fascinating because you could tell what people knew about because those departments were empty. So the things that were left on the shelf after that first 48 hours were things that people didn't know what to do with. Everything else was gone, all the vitamin C and the elderberry and the aloe, and people were making hand sanitizer, the colloidal silver, like so much was gone. And so I called my husband back on the East Coast, and I said, go to the grocery store and get prepared, like it's a winter storm coming. Had no idea how long this was going to go on. I come home, and he's only bought like big cans of beans and just odd things. And I'm like, honey, what were you thinking? He says, well, I wasn't hungry. I've been fasting. It's like, well, let's go to the, so it was a ripple effect across the nation. Like it didn't really start with the awareness and the preparation on the East Coast like it was on the West, where you are. And so that it was terrifying. It was, and so we're all still recovering from this stress and the impact it's had on our lives, and the losses. You know, a lot of us have lost friends and loved ones, and so the recovery period, I think, not only includes reconnecting with community and establishing a routine that nourishes the body back with healthy foods and lifestyle, and the herbal tonics are really wonderful here, you know, not just from the perspective of mood, but really also incorporating cardiovascular support, because I believe, you know, the stress of all this, including exposure to that particular virus, really did an impact on our whole cardiovascular system, which nourishes all the other systems, therefore they're affected. So that really brings us to a holistic view of health and recovery.
It was an interesting time that I learned. I think we all learned a lot from that. I think none of us want to ever revisit and never go back to that again. It's not a destination that I want to ever have to go through again. But, you know, I want to thank you for being here today. This is so much fun.
I love it. Thank you.
Now I'm going to put you on the front burner. Leave everybody with a thought of the day. Something, it could mean anything to you, and maybe something that's been important that you've been able to live with, that you can leave everybody a thought.
Love thy neighbor.
Can it be that easy? Yeah, it can. I love that. You know, I think that's a long forgotten situation. You know, it's funny. I was actually walking out of my street last week, and I looked down the road, and I don't know anybody on my street. When I was raised, I mean, you knew everybody. If you did something wrong down the street, by the time you got home, they'd already called your parents. So you knew you're going to get it again when you got home. Now I don't know anybody. I just do this, hey, and that's about all I get anymore. And I do kind of miss those kind of Mayberry kind of values that I grew up with in the Midwest. So number one. Number two, if you had to leave the planet today, what would you like to be remembered for?
Compassionate.
I think so too. Well, you definitely have lots of that. I really want to thank you for taking the time. It's so good to reconnect with you. You know, we've been friends for a long time, and I know I have an amazing amount of respect for what you do, and I think you're awesome. Will you come back and see us again?
I'd love to. Thank you, Jeff.
I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Kelly Clonts, representing Terry Naturally, Europharma, and just amazing icon in our industry. Has been a very staple force and a beloved person in the industry, well known and amazingly respected for good reason. I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. Remember, you can listen to the content from the shows on any platform, your favorite platform. I like going to my YouTube channel. Now remember, when you go there, that little button at the top, subscribe, please press that. It just takes a second. What it does is it gives visibility and bigger exposure to these amazing guests that I have on the show. So make sure that you take the time to go there and visit with these amazing people and listen to them, and have your friends tune in, because I have a plethora of awesome guests that you get to listen to. So I hope you'll take the time to do that. Kelly, have a wonderful day. Be well, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll get to connect my next chance that I come down to Atlanta.
I'd love that. Yes.
I think it'd be great. Everybody have a wonderful day. Be well, and God bless.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.